Once we fly above flight level 150, we can then select the IAS push button again to enter into pitch hold mode and use the nose up wheel to select 5 degrees nose up pitch. This will give us a satisfactory rate of climb up to our assigned flight level 220, and you will notice throughout this procedure, of course, that this indicated airspeed will decay slowly, and this has to be monitored to make sure that it doesn't decay too excessively. And don't forget, with all altitude functions, the outsail must be armed at all times. Passing flight level 200, we perform another pressurization and altimeter check to make sure that the altimeters are still synchronized and set to the standard setting. And at this stage, now that we've finished with the navigation aids for Birmingham, I'm going to set the Jersey VOR 112.2 on the right hand navigation receiver, and that was one to go for flight level 220 and cruise altitude. So I'm going to set 112.2, the Jersey VOR, on nav 2, and that will give us a distance measuring equipment indication of how far we are from Jersey Airport as we get that bit closer to it, obviously to provide us with guidance for descent. So as we level out, you see the outstar function now becoming active, and once we're fully level at our assigned cruise altitude 220, we get the alt capture function, and we can now select the cruise power 850 RPM very carefully on the condition levers, and the cruise power is set, and now we can sit back and relax for a few minutes. During the flight, we would be monitoring the weather for suitable diversion airfield, so that in the cruise, if we had some kind of medical emergency on board or a malfunction of some kind, we could make an appropriate diversion plan. So as we head towards the south coast, I may be checking the weather for Southampton, for example, which is Echo Golf Hotel India, and in the real aeroplane we'd have to be using the ATIS frequency for Southampton, or alternatively the Volmet frequency, but I'm using Active Skynet, so I can simply type in the ICAO code Echo Golf Hotel India, and it's showing weather 160 degrees 5 knots, so we could expect runway 20, visibility greater than 10 kilometers, and a QNH of 1023. So I'm going to set that as a backup on the standby altimeter. Also making sure at this stage that the aircraft is correctly balanced. You can see quite balanced at the moment, so I'm going to select a little bit of left-hand rudder just to keep the aircraft nice and balanced in the cruise. For economy reasons, in normal circumstances, we'd be using the low-range cruise speed options during the flight, but because we're running very, very late, because I've been nattering away to you, I'm going to use VMO minus about 10 knots. That's the maximum operating speed that we're allowed to use in normal circumstances, so we're not allowed to exceed anything more than 10 knots below VMO, which is shown by the bottom of the red and black barber's pole. So 250 knots I think is perfectly satisfactory for the cruise. And already you can see that we have a DME indication on nav 2, so that would suggest that the Jersey VOR is now within range, and we're going to confirm that it's the Jersey VOR by using the ident option on the ARCDU. So we have the DME for receiver number 2, and I cross-checked the Morse code ident with the Morse code given on the aerodrome chart. Yep, so that's Juliet Sierra Yankee, which is correct for the Jersey VOR. So we now know that we are 143 miles away from Jersey. if we have a look at the arrival routing, we can see the Jersey 1 X-ray. Then the only altitude restriction we have is to be flight level 200 by 10 nautical miles before Lelna. So, as a reference, we can use the vertical navigation option in the flight management system. We're going to select Lelna, which as you can see is number 7. 10 miles before Lelna, we need to be flight level 200. Target vertical speed 2,000 feet a minute is satisfactory, and that will then generate a top of descent point which we can use as a reference. As I've said to you in previous videos, we don't use vertical navigation mode on the flight guidance control panel to actually control the aircraft's descent. This is done using vertical speed mode, but this just simply gives us a bit of a reference for our arrival, and we also know that we need to start the descent within about 66 miles. If you take 72 from 125, that's not too bad actually, it's about right. So at this stage we can probably start planning for the arrival. First of all, we check in the flight plan that we have the correct arrival routing. The Jersey 1 X-ray takes us via Lelna, then Alderney NDB, and then Shark waypoint, and then going onwards to the Jersey NDB and the approach. So the arrival routing is correct, and next we're going to look at the VOR DME chart. So looking first of all at our safety altitude within 25 nautical miles, we have a fairly low safety altitude of 1900 feet. Airdrome elevation of 277 feet, which we have set on the landing altitude gauge. We need the primary aid set 112.2, that's the Jersey VOR. We've already idented it. Transition altitude 5,000 feet, transition level as per air traffic control. And if we look at the approach, you can see that the pattern is going to take us to Jersey VOR and then outbound on a track of 255 degrees. The final approach point is then at 11.6 DME, at which point we should be at 2,000 feet, and we descend on a 3-degree glide path to the decision altitude of 650 feet. So we can set the decision altitude of 650 feet, and as a backup reference I'm also going to set the local NDB 329 on the left ADF and have that selected on my side. Weather at Jersey once again. We have a QNH of 1023 which is set on the standby altimeter, temperature 12 degrees, dew point 10 degrees, 150 degrees, 15 knots. So we've got a little bit of a crosswind there, which should make for an interesting landing, but it's still within limits, and visibility greater than 10 kilometers. So all in all, we still have perfectly good conditions for the arrival into Jersey. We're going to use AuraSim again, this time for a landing performance. So in the airport we're going to select Jersey. The current air rack hasn't been updated, so it still says runway 09, but it's actually runway 08 for Jersey, but we'll take that as read. Because we have a runway length of less than 2,000 meters, we're going to use the full flap 35 for the landing. Anti-ice won't be required, and we can use the get weather function to get the correct weather. And just cross-checking with what we have from the ATIS. We have a QNH of 1023, 12 degrees temperature, 150 degrees, 16 knots is good enough. And the landing weight, we can cross-check this with the flight plan. So the flight plan has an estimated landing weight of 23.6, and then in the performance page of the FMS you can see that we also have 23.566, which we can round up to 23.6. So I think that's a fair estimate, and we always try and round up in these circumstances for the worst case scenario. So 23.600, and we press calculate. So flap 35, it's Jersey runway 08 actually, correct landing weight, and we have a VREF of 110 knots, so that is going to be our approach speed, that's 1.3 times the stall speed, and a V climb of 141. So we can now update our figures. VREF 110 and V climb 141, and on the GPWS landing flap setting we need 35 degrees to make sure we don't get any erroneous flap warnings on the approach. Now that we've done the weight calculations, we can also see from the aerodrome chart for the VOR approach that with an approach speed of 110 knots we can expect a rate of descent for the approach between 530 and 640. So I think 600 feet per minute is a very good intermediary value, so we'll use 600 feet per minute once we've passed the final approach point at 11.6 DME. Looking at the procedure once again, we have a hold should we need it at Jersey, with an inbound track of 265 degrees from the VOR and minimum 2,000 feet. And the outbound procedure, we're going to head from Jersey onto a track of 255 degrees until 14.6 DME before turning right onto the approach track of 085 degrees towards the final approach point at 11.6 DME. And for the base turn we have a max speed of 185 knots. As you can see from the navigation display, we are approaching our top of descent point, and we're not far from the 66 miles that we theoretically calculated, so I'm now going to run the descent checklist. The descent checks say pressurization is set, we have the landing altitude for Jersey set, GPWS flat position set at 35, safety and transition altitude, safety within 25 miles is 1900 feet, transition altitude is 5000, and the briefing and bugs have all been reviewed. So we have the VREF and V climb set. Don't forget, of course, we need to set that on first officer's side as well. And that completes the descent checklist. So we've started our descent now, we're just passing 179 for flight level 100 initially. We're routing towards Lelna, which is the starting point for the arrival routing into Jersey, descending at about 236 knots indicated thereabouts in vertical speed mode. At this point we can review the fuel situation. So as you can see, we've got about 930 kilos on board at the moment. As we discussed, we have a final reserve figure of 420 kilograms, so that's the minimum fuel quantity with which we can land. So we're expecting to have well in excess of that by the time we arrive at Jersey. And although the values in the FMS performance page are usually quite haphazard and not massively accurate as they would be in an A320, you can see that the fuel on board expected at Jersey is around the 845 figure. So we're well in excess of the final reserve, and that means that we should have sufficient fuel to get to Jersey and have about 10 minutes holding thereabouts before diverting to Guernsey if required. I've also checked the weather for Guernsey, and the conditions there: temperature 12 degrees, dew point 10, 140 degrees at 15 knots, visibility greater than 10 kilometres, and a QNH of 1021. So very similar weather conditions at Jersey, and pretty favourable. It's clear skies with good visibility, so we can easily get into Guernsey to divert should we need to. As you can see, the weather over the channel has cleared up quite significantly, so we can expect probably visual meteorological conditions as we head into Jersey, but for the purposes of demonstration I'm going to do the full VOR DME procedure irrespective of the very good visibility that we're likely to encounter. So we're just about to pass flight level 100, so at this stage you need to select the landing lights on, confirm that the fasten belt signs are selected on as well. The aircraft pressurisation system is depressurising normally and the differential looks sensible. I'm now going to report my intentions on VATSIM and route direct to the Jersey VOR Juliet Sierra Yankee. I confirm that the correct waypoint has been selected, accept, and confirm on the navigation display that the routing has corrected normally. That's one to go for flight level 70, and at this stage I'm now going to descend below the nominated transition level to 3,000 feet. Altcell is armed, and we're going to set the QNH, which is now 1022. So now the approach QNH has been set. We select the fuel pumps on, autofeather on, standby, hide and PTU controls can be on as well, and we can then run the approach checklist. So altimeters QNH 1022 set, and the altimeters are cross-checked. Fuel pumps on, standby, hide and PTU control on, hydraulics checked, passenger signs on, and the cabin is secure. And that's the approach checklist complete. So as you can see with the DME, we're about 6 miles from the Jersey VOR now, getting very close indeed. Here's the beautiful Jersey Island in front of us, and despite the fact that the visibility is very good, we're not going to perform a visual approach. We are actually going to do the full procedure for demonstration purposes. We're getting nice and close. I'm going to zoom in on the navigation display. We have the outbound track of 255 degrees selected, and as we pass over the VOR we're going to turn onto that track in order to establish on the outbound segment of the VOR procedure. So there we are, we're approaching the top of Jersey now, entering to the 255 degree track and using the nav source now to select VOR 1 and selecting the outbound track of 255 degrees. So I'm going to intercept that track and use the nav function on the FGCP with VOR mode now selected, armed. So you can see that we now have VOR capture. The aeroplane's turning onto the 255 outbound radial, and I'm now going to reduce speed back towards 170 knots initially, so we could plan to be roughly 170 knots on the downwind leg with flap 5 selected. The flap extension speed for flap 5, as you can see, 200 knots. So once we're below 200 knots, we're cleared to select flap 5. So speed checked, flap 5. 5 degrees selected on the flap lever and 5 degrees confirmed on the gauge. Going to maintain 150 knots, and we're maintaining on the 255 outbound radial until 14.6 DME. So now we're further outbound, and you can see we're approaching the 14.6 DME mark. I've pre-selected on the first officer's side on the nav2 receiver, which also has Jersey tuned, the inbound track for the approach of 085 degrees, and we'll be setting that on the primary aid on the captain's side in a moment. And I've also now pre-selected the intercept heading for the final approach track on the heading bug. So we'll enter into heading mode to intercept the 085 degree inbound to Juliet Sierra Yankee. So just about approaching 14.6 now, so turning, and at the same time heading, setting the inbound track for the approach of 085 degrees. Now on the base turn, max speed 185 knots as per the chart, and we're going to select the landing gear down and start reducing speed back towards VREF. Once we're established on an intercept heading, we can select nav mode, and you can see we already have VOR capture. So we've intercepted the approach track now, and we're about to establish on it. At this stage I'm going to select flap 15, speed check to flap 15, and start reducing towards the approach speed. So the landing gear is now down with 3 greens. Start descending towards the platform altitude, 2,000 feet. And at this stage we can select bleeds to minimum,
2,500.
We'll have a reduced power landing, condition levers to max, start bringing the speed back, selecting flap 35, speed check to flap 35, and start bringing the speed back towards VREF. So approaching the descent point now, we're in 0.2 DME, so we're going to select vertical speed for the approach, which we agreed at 600 feet per minute. And we perform the landing checklist. So landing gear down 3 greens, condition levers max, bleeds minimum, and flaps 35 set. So we're now using the aerodrome chart, the VOR page on the aerodrome chart, to cross check. So at 9.3 miles we need to be at 1280 feet, and you can see that we're virtually at that stage now. So we're pretty much exactly on the vertical approach trajectory that we require, going a little bit fast. So bringing that back to a VREF of 110. You can see from the parpies that we're on the correct approach trajectory. Continuing, at 8.3 miles the chart says we should be 960 feet, and again we are pretty much exactly there. So we're on the exact approach trajectory, but as you can see we do have an offset VOR approach into Jersey, so we're not exactly on the centre line. But now we have good visual contact with the runway. I'm now going to deselect the autopilot. Harp is showing a little bit low there, so just going to adjust the rate of descent slightly. And bring the aircraft onto the centre line. We need to be stabilised really by 500 feet. So there we are, we have quite a crosswind component, so we are going to crab a little bit.
500.
Stable. A little bit of turbulence there off the sheer cliff
100.
face.
$50, $40, $30, $20, $10.
There we go. Once we're at taxiing speed, we can select the flight control locks to on. Deselect the autopilot disengage light if it didn't go out already. Deselect the spoilers. Select the flight mode and annunciator to standby. And retract the flaps. So after landing then, the yaw dampers can be selected off, transponder selected to standby, radar standby, fuel pumps and auto feather can be selected off, main bus tie can go into tie, pedo static can be switched off and we have the correct enunciations on the caution and warning panel, taxi light on, landing lights off, anti-collision to red, and once we've had a 1 minute stabilisation period, we can then shut down engine 1 for taxi. So power lever goes into disc, condition lever into start and feather, and the bleed for engine 1 selected off. The engine then remains in start and feather for a minute before shutting down fully, and the appropriate warnings will appear on the caution and warning panel, which can be verified for correct indications. And obviously the single engine taxi procedure allows us to save a little bit of fuel and reduce engine wear as well during the taxi in. After that we can then run the after landing checklist. So the control locks on, lights set, flaps 0, main bus tie on, flight taxi is in taxi, ice protection is off, pitot static off, yaw damper off, and the radar is standby. And that's the after landing checklist complete. For arrival onto stand, we check the stand area looks clear. We have sufficient guidance. I think we have digital guidance on stand 10 and it's displaying normally, and the taxi light can be off at this stage to make sure we don't dazzle any ground staff. The stand is clear and we're clear on both sides. Parking brake can be set to park. The remaining engine can be selected in start and feather, and in the meantime we can select the standby high and PTU controls off, weather radar off, remaining engine bleed can be selected off. We need at least 30 seconds with the engine on start and feather before we shut it down, and in the meantime we can run the shutdown checklist. So the brake is on, fuel pumps off, hydraulic pump and PTU control normal, power and condition levers disc and start and feather on number 2, shutdown on number 1 of course. Nose wheel steering has to be selected off, radar off, transponder TCAS 2000 standby, engine bleeds min off, APU GPU on, and as per usual we'll have the systems pages on once the engines are shut down, with doors on one side and electrics on the other. So the DC power is now engaged. We can shut down engine number 2. We've had at least 30 seconds. Passenger signs can be selected off, and the anti-collision light is off as well. You can see the doors opening now. We check for the correct indications on the caution and warning panel, and that's the end of the flight. And that's it, that's our flight to Jersey with a VOR DME approach, and I hope that this program's given you a good idea into how we operate the aircraft in normal circumstances, and also a valuable insight into the non-precision approach. Thank you very much indeed for watching.